Hey, welcome back to another edition of FBC Live. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've had a great week. Now, you'll notice things are a little bit different on FBC Live this week, and they're going to be different for the next few weeks, and that's because our country is different. We've gone into lockdown 2, and therefore at FBC, we're adjusting our approach to some of the things that we're offering to keep you connected and to keep you engaged. So you're watching us on FBC Live, and this content is available on Sunday mornings. When you wake up, it will be there for you, and fresh material, fresh content every week for the next few weeks at least. But also at 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning, we're doing Zoom Church, and that's an opportunity where we'll be using some of the same content that you'll watch here, but an opportunity just to see other faces and connect and get into breakout rooms and see people face to face on a digital platform. And if you're interested in finding out about that, just go to fbcnext.com/live, and there'll be a link at the bottom and a little bit more information about how you can plug into Zoom Church. Well, enough about that. Let's jump in with the stuff that we've got in store for us this week. We're starting a brand new series where for the next 3 weeks we're going to be exploring how can we find hope in a hopeless place. Well, let me hand over to Paul, who's going to share with us this week.
If you find yourself searching for hope in a tough time, then you're not alone. Lockdown in a pandemic is certainly a tough time, and in this 3-part series we're going to explore finding hope in a hopeless place. And today, finding hope when life has loss and pain. Which of the characters in the Winnie the Pooh stories are you most like? My favourite is Eeyore. There's something about the endlessly gloomy outlook of Eeyore that I find hilarious. My family think I'm an Eeyore because I'm so good at being gloomy, well, tongue-in-cheek gloomy. But this is really a dark time, isn't it? Postponed weddings, missed graduations, painful separations from family and friends, colleagues furloughed or now laid off, and the cancellation of sports. Loss of so many of our freedoms with the COVID restrictions, and the prospect of Christmas with a lot of limitations. Some of us have lost our health or well-being, and some of us have sadly lost friends or family members who have died and have then had to arrange funerals with few people and no wake. And now, after an emotionally draining 6 months, the second wave is here, and it's not fun. You don't have to be an Eeyore to realise that this is going to go on for a long time. Some of us have lost our jobs. The days are getting darker and shorter and colder and wetter, and it just feels like we're running out of steam. What we need is to find some hope when life doesn't deliver, and when it doesn't deliver what we wanted or needed. And to find hope in a hopeless place, we're going to look at one of the most ancient books in the Bible, which is about the story of a man who lost everything. It's called the Book of Job. In the original language, it's a long poem. In fact, Alfred Lord Tennyson called it the greatest poem in the ancient and modern world. Job's story explores the timeless problem of suffering and his response to it. And ironically, Job is the book in the Bible with the most mentions of the word hope. There are 3 parts to the story of Job. The first part is when he loses everything. He loses his livestock, which is his source of income, his children, and then his health, and even his relationship with his wife. He finds himself deprived of everything. And that's the bit of the story we're going to look at today. How do we find hope when we experience loss and pain? The second part of the story, and that's for next week, is when his suffering goes on and inexplicably on. That's when Job's character is really tested. And the final part of the story is when Job eventually has an encounter with God, who replies to Job's endless questions about suffering. That's when we will ask the question, how do we find hope when suffering doesn't make sense? There is some debate about whether Job was a real person in history or whether the story is just a story, but whichever is true, we can still learn from it. Actually, there are 2 other mentions of Job elsewhere in the Bible which suggests to me he probably was a real person. Now, Job is quite a long book. It's very readable though, so I encourage you to read it. But I'm going to have to compress the story. It starts with a scene in the heavenly realms where Satan, who is an evil angelic being, Satan tells God that the only reason Job fears God and shuns evil is that he's richly blessed by God. He has a large family and he's quite well off. So apparently, to test Job and prove that Satan is wrong about him, God allows Satan to take away Job's blessings, though he is not allowed to take his life. So one day, a whole series of disasters happen in Job's life. A storm flattens the house where his children are and kills them all. And bands of raiders steal all his animals and kill his servants. It's a chain of disaster, and these disasters are clearly inflicted by Satan, which makes me question the insurance company's phrase disasters as acts of God. Well, God may have allowed these disasters, but they were in fact acts of Satan. In one dreadful day, Job loses all his children, all his wealth, and of course he's shocked. He shaves his head, rips his robe, which is what that culture did when they were bereaved, and then he speaks. And what Job says in response to these disasters is very interesting. What people say under pressure is often quite revealing, isn't it? We're going to be looking at some of the key sayings of Job because they reveal his heart. He starts by saying, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In other words, I didn't bring anything into this world, and I'm not going to take anything out of it. God is in control, and I'm going to continue to worship him. Wow. So Satan is proved wrong about Job. And so Satan goes back to God and tells God that if Job loses his health, well, then he will curse God. And once again, God allows it. Another terrible day came when Job suddenly got very ill and his skin came out in a painful, blistering rash of boils all over his body. It says he sat on the ground and scraped his own skin with a piece of pottery. This was really horrible and very personal. And for Job's wife, this is the last straw. Job has become a smelly, putrid mass of boils, and she says to him, "Curse God and die." And I think we have to cut her some slack because she must have been already out of her mind after losing all her children. And now her husband has become detestably ill. Under pressure, she just hits out and says, "Curse God and die." Remember that Satan had told God that Job would curse him? It could be that Satan used the pain of Job's wife to try to provoke him to do just that, to curse God. But yet again, Job's response is tellingly perceptive in the midst of it all. He says, "You're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" How on earth does this guy keep so measured in the face of such grief and suffering? What is it in Job that keeps him on an even keel? Why is it that some people can endure suffering with an attitude of dignity and even peace that is impressive? Well, 3 of Job's friends hear about how bad he is and they come to see him, and they are so appalled by the condition that he's in that they sit down with him in sympathetic silence, which is, by the way, often the best thing we can do for people who've suffered loss. No words are enough, but our presence can be a great comfort. Anyway, a week after of this, Job finally comes out with a bit of grumpiness. He doesn't curse God, but he curses the day of his own birth, basically saying it would have been better if he'd never been born. And that starts a long dialogue between him and his friends, which is all in poetry in the Hebrew. Job starts complaining about how unfair all this is, how unjust it is, and how he wants God to show up so he can question him about it. He wants to ask God how on earth he can be both good and just and still allow all this to happen. That's the question we all have, isn't it? But even with this complaining, there is a remarkable resilience in Job. And that resilience was because he knew deep in his heart that this world is not all there is. He believed in God and had experienced God in his life. That was what gave him perspective and a resilient hope. You see, anyone who does not believe in God or who does not know God cannot have a hope bigger than what is in this life. People who only have hope for things in this world can easily feel like victims when something goes wrong. If all your hope is in this world, then when you lose what you have in this world, you lose your hope. But Job had a hope bigger than that. He recognized that we live in a world that has gone wrong and that bad things can happen to anyone, whether they're basically good people or not. He was a realist, but he had hope in God because he knew God. Incredibly painful though the loss of his family was, Job knew there was a bigger picture and that what happens in this life is not the end. And you may well say to me, well, that's all very well, but what good is hope beyond this life if I can't pay the mortgage or feed my family or get better from my illness? This life matters. Yes, it does matter. But there is more than just this life and this world. This is not the end. This is not all there is, and that does make a difference. Hope is what enables us to put one foot in front of the other in everyday life. Sometimes the impressive thing is just to keep going when times are tough. And perseverance and endurance are important character-forming habits. Christians don't just persevere out of stubbornness. We persevere because we've got something better to look forward to. The supreme wonder of Job's statements is that he has such trust in God. He said at one point, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." Imagine what it would be like if your trust in God was so well developed that you knew he would carry you through suffering and even death and out the other side. Every so often, in the middle of his emotionally honest and long-winded complaints, Job comes out with these surprising statements of hope. So underneath the surface pain he feels, there is obviously something deeper that keeps coming out, and it's that deeper stuff that makes the difference. It is a deep hope in the character of God. One of Job's most revealing statements is when, in the middle of his complaining, he suddenly says, "He knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold." Many years after Job, one of the Hebrew prophets, Malachi, said that God will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will refine them like gold and silver. And a refiner exposes the metal to intense heat, which liquefies it, but doesn't harm what's being refined. It purifies it. And Job seemed to grasp that reality in his own life. He was angry with God, but although he was angry at the apparent injustice of his suffering, he seemed to also realise that God was allowing him to go through something that would purify him and make him ultimately better. And that knowledge and that hope helped him endure it. His conviction was that in this suffering there was a way he was taking, some sort of path. It wasn't a meaningless experience. And because of that, he would end up better and not bitter. Can we have the same perspective? Can we see that there is a larger picture than simply what we're experiencing now? Can we trust God in the same way that Job trusted God, to ultimately work for good? It's a real challenge to trust and hope in God with a nagging doubt about why God is allowing bad things to happen. This is the age-old issue people have with God and suffering, isn't it? As Stephen Fry said when he was asked about what he would say to God, "Bone cancer in children," he said, "What's all that about then? How can you allow that?" And we will see as the Job story unfolds that this is the very argument Job puts to God. How can you allow all this to happen to someone who tries to live right? It's not fair and it doesn't make sense. And we will look at that intellectual problem of suffering in the third and final message of this series. But even though Job struggled with that enormous intellectual difficulty, there was still something in him that recognised God at a deeper level. His intellectual problem and his complaining did not wreck his underlying conviction that God could, in fact, be trusted. You may be somebody who has believed in God for years and already feel that you know something of God. Or you may be listening to this without any clear sense of who God is yet. You may be going through a really tough time. A lot of people are. All I can say about this phase in Job's life, when he lost everything, is that he had hope because he knew God and trusted God. Knowing God is knowing hope, and finding Jesus is finding hope. And it's possible for anyone to find God if they seek him. In fact, one of the promises that God makes is that you will find him when you seek for him with all your heart. Maybe this season can be a time when you choose to seek God. You can simply say to God something like, "If you're there, God, I want to know you. Help me to know you." Seek him with all your heart and you will find him. From Job's early response to loss and pain, we learn that it's possible to endure more easily if you have a genuine hope in God. Instead of feeling like a victim, it's possible to choose to trust in God, and that is empowering. And that choice makes a huge difference to how you feel day by day, and ultimately to your well-being. The other thing we learn from Job's story is that there is some sort of connection between what happens in the spiritual realm and what happens on earth. That tells me that prayer makes a difference. Prayer is simply talking with God and listening to him. That's what Job did through his experience. He kept his communication with God going. Even though his language with God was blunt at times, he was being real, he kept up his praying. Job trusted God enough to be real with him. He depended on God instead of dismissing God. And if we pray and hold on to our hope and trust in God, we can better endure times of suffering. We can even emerge stronger in our relationship with God in the end. Imagine what it would be like if your hope in God was so strong it carried you through. Imagine the difference it would make if you resolved to put your hope in God at this time. In this time of trial, when so many of us are feeling sadness and limitations, it's okay to tell God how you feel. Job did. God knows your feelings anyway, so you might as well express them. Lament is okay. Yet in our lament, the path to hope lies in the possibility of putting our trust in the character and immensity of God, because he's not remote, but real and present with his people. Jesus said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world." I was reminded recently of the poem by Minnie Lou Haskins that was given to King George VI in the year war broke out. His young daughter, now our Queen, gave it to him, and he read it to the nation in his Christmas address. It says, "I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than a light and safer than a known way.'" That's the key, isn't it? Put your trust in God, because to trust God is to know hope.
Silence steals my voice. You understand me. You understand me. Come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were, yeah. the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands and leave the rest in the Father's hands. Yes, I will rest. I will rest in the Father's hands and leave the rest in the Father's hands. Oh, I will rest in the Father's hands. Oh, and leave the rest in the Father's hands. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So much bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were.
The thing about hope is that we find it in hopeless situations. You know, we don't discover hope when everything is going well. We actually find it when the wheels start to come off. And perhaps that's what you're experiencing a bit this week. I know many of us are in that situation, and I hope that the content and the message that we've shared today is helpful and encouraging and inspiring for you. We'd love to be able to stand with you and support you. And if you need any support, if you want someone to chat to or pray with, please do reach out to us. Go to fbcnext.com and you can find loads of information there, and you can find out how you can contact us. And we would love to pray with you, stand with you, support you, and encourage you in any way we can this week. We've got a couple of questions for you just to think about, to mull over as you go through your week. Maybe you want to chat about them with your friends and your family as well. They're going to appear on the screen. Whatever you face this week, I hope it's a great week, and I hope you're able to discover some of this hope that Jesus offers us. Take care.